It has been little over 10 years now since The Force Awakens came out. A movie which might have actually had less cultural impact than James Cameron's Avatar. Which is not even a joke. I randomly brought this movie up in an unrelated conversation and she deadass forgot that this movie even existed. She did remember The Last Jedi though, so there's something I guess. But regardless, if you have seen my rewrite videos for the prequel trilogy, you might think I prefer the sequel trilogy then, after I've been so critical of them.
Good guess, but actually no.
So call me the enlightened centrist of the Star Wars fanbase if you will, for in my opinion, both the sequel and prequel trilogy kind of fall short in a lot of key areas. Okay, so to be more accurate, I've made two different analogies that basically mean the same thing, and I couldn't decide which one to use over the other, so here's both. Number 1. Where the prequel trilogy zigged where it should have zagged, and the sequel trilogy zagged where it should have zigged. 2. It feels like, in retrospect, the sequel trilogy took the wrong lessons from the success of the original trilogy and the failures of the prequel trilogy. But anyway, like with all my rewrites, I'll go over what I think are some of the movie's shortcomings. However, in this case, I might as well address the one that's most frequently cited, which is that this movie, as it is just a cheap imitation of A New Hope. Now, watch as I instantly start some controversy because, on its own, I think that was a good idea at the time. It's easy to forget nowadays, but the prequel trilogy was pretty much the most despised series of movies ever, period. Not just at the time, but in all of cinema. So I think repeating a few beats from the first Star Wars movie during that period made a lot of sense. However, the problem lies entirely in the fact that it goes too far in that regard, in my opinion. I do think people who call it a copy-paste remake of A New Hope are still somewhat exaggerating, but I do think they aren't wholly wrong either. So here are 3 main changes that I might as well mention now rather than later. In this version, Starkiller Base is no longer present. 2. The First Order, being the more dominant faction at this point in the timeline, is no longer the case. 3. The New Jedi Order and the New Republic are still a thing in this version. I'm doing this because, hopefully as I can demonstrate, there was no reason to undo all the progress from the original trilogy that the main characters did. Anyway, with that, let's finally get going with the actual rewrite of this movie. So, one quick aside before continuing, but I've heard people say that the First Order came just out of nowhere, but that's not really true. It's literally explained in the original opening crawl that they have risen from the ashes of the Empire, so I don't know what people are talking about when they say that. But anyway, after the crawl, we start with a shot of the moon. Like in the original, we see what looks like a Star Destroyer viewed from down below, flying across the endless depths of space. But unlike what we got, just like in an older version of the script, the vehicle itself is derelict and is being towed by several smaller ships. We then cut to a young woman watching the damaged vehicle crash into the surface of the planet. Now, I have taken quite a bit of inspiration from the official concept art book for this movie, where I learned that Rey was originally going to be called Kira. Now, I do think Rey as a name is perfectly fine, but I would be lying if I said that Kira did not also have a nice ring to it. So, as a compromise, mostly to myself, her full name in this version is Kira Rey. And if that name sounds too silly, let me politely remind you that these are, or at one point were, officially named characters. Anyway, back to the story. Also, for this version of Jaku, it has been reimagined as a giant wetland planet covered with lakes and rivers. Also more like how it was in the original concept art for this movie. Now, being a desert planet is all well and good, but the worst part of Jaku is that it looks almost just like Diet Tatooine, because at least with Geonosis, while it was also a desert planet, it at least visually was distinct enough from Tatooine that you would not confuse the two. But I decided to go with this concept purely because, besides maybe Naboo, we haven't seen this type of planet in a movie before. But anyway, we see Kira Ray, or just Ray as everyone else calls her, or sometimes Kira, drive toward the giant Star Destroyer on her speeder, followed by a tranquil sequence where she swims through one of the deeper lakes and into a hole on the side of the newly dumped Star Destroyer. She walks through the empty halls and picking up pieces of machinery from the destroyed terminals and ruptured hulls. Sidebar, but since Jaku is a much different planet in this version, it would not make sense for her clothes to look the same way that they do in the official movie, but luckily the clothes she has on Octo are more than a fitting replacement. But regardless, if I did have to praise this movie for one thing, is that it does a really good job of establishing Rey's daily life, which is why, beyond the difference in planetary biome, everything pretty much unfolds the same. Rey returns with a scrap, she talks to that old lady, and gets stiffed by Unkar Plutt, who tells her that if she wants better pay, then she should just go Rastar hunting. Rey glares at him and decides to just go back home, which is also a derelict AT-AT walker. She scratches another hatch on the inside of the wall and has her dinner on the outside, staring out at the wide mist of Jaku. Now we get to the scene with the First Order stormtroopers in the ship just before they are deployed to a battle, concurrently on a different planet. They storm out of the troop carrier just like in the original, but one of the stormtroopers gets shot and one of his comrades rushes over to him, allowing the dying one to smear his blood on his helmet. The other living stormtrooper gets up shakily and starts to buckle over again. For reasons he doesn't know, he can sense the destruction and deaths of people he can't even see to the point where he loses consciousness. He is awakened when another stormtrooper tells him that they've won and have rounded up all the survivors for questioning. The stormtrooper takes the hand of the other and leads them to the village square, where all the natives are lined up. Questioning them is none other than Captain Phasma, who, in the original, might as well be the biggest jobber in the entire Star Wars franchise. So in this version, we are naturally going to make her an actually credible threat and badass. She questions the village elder and asks him where Lord San Tekka is. The village elder tells her that he had already left this planet 3 days ago. Disappointed, Phasma shoots him and orders the others to execute everyone else they find in this village. The stormtrooper with the blood-stained helmet watches on. Now, I don't know if Finn was ever supposed to be force sensitive this early on, but if he was, then we might as well establish it now. They all receive orders to return to the shuttles. It's then when Phasma notices the stormtrooper with the blood-stained helmet. She calls out to FN-2187 and tells him to get a move on. This is enough to break him out of his stupor, and he rushes towards the shuttle with the other surviving stormtroopers. We transition to the First Order's base located on an unknown and unnamed Tiger planet. Once he is inside his quarters, FN-2187 takes his helmet off, with sweat on his brow and all the memories of the battle he had just experienced swirling in his head. This is also where we see that, unlike in the original trilogy, the stormtroopers are now also composed of different alien species besides just humans. Captain Phasma informs Supreme Leader Thrawn that Lord San Tekka escaped before they could arrive. Besides her stands General Hux, who likewise kneels before Thrawn and apologizes profusely. One other change is that in this version, the MacGuffin is not the plans for Starkiller Base, but the location and names of every organization and individual both inside and outside the New Republic who have been secretly funding the First Order this entire time. And while the First Order is not weak, a sufficient enough fleet could easily wipe them out. Thrawn dismisses both Phasma and Hux, where we then transition back to FN-2187 while he's having lunch with the surviving members of his squad. Unlike his fellow troopers who are congratulating each other on a well-fought battle, especially since it was their first, FN-2187 is silent and only responds when one of them asks what's wrong with him. He struggles to respond and eventually excuses himself back to his quarters, where even still he finds no privacy as Phasma is standing in the entrance to the sleeping quarters. She gives FN-2187 a warning that she can't tolerate weak soldiers within her ranks, and says that next time he falters, at best she will leave him behind, or worst, she will execute him personally for gross incompetence. FN-2187 promises it won't happen again, and Phasma, with one final warning, dismisses him. Anyway, Lord Santeca is contacting Leia to negotiate a rendezvous point with one of her best pilots, where he will then hand over the data. He is urged to hurry, as being so far outside of New Republic space is still dangerous. Lord Santeca assures Leia that he will be quick. We transition back to one of the First Order Star Destroyers, where FN-2187 is suiting up along with his comrades. Speaking of Finn, we see him wiping his helmet of the bloodstain left from his friend, FN-2003. One of his squad mates comforts him and says that they will avenge him soon enough. If you're wondering why I've decided to spend so much time on him this early on, it's because upon my rewatch of the movie, I do feel that his defection from the First Order is just a little bit too fast. Now, I don't think it needs to take up a massive amount of runtime or anything, but I just think having a few more scenes beforehand would have made it feel even just a little bit less rushed. But that's it really. We then cut to Lord Santeca meeting up with Poe Dameron, who, as a sidebar, will be flying a new type of starfighter called a Z-Wing, instead of the T-70 X-Wing that he had in the movie. As I feel that's another, admittedly, small example of this movie going too far with the New Hope similarities. So, something like the Z-Wing would ideally strike a fine balance between something familiar, but also new, and ironically, I actually think BB-8 is a good example of this. Also, before I get back to the plot, I'm also severely disappointed that in both the pre- and post-Disney era of Star Wars, there are still 14 missing letters to base more Rebel fighters on, at least to my knowledge. Especially after I learned that there was a pretty great design for a J-Wing by artist James Klein. Like, it just seems so obvious from a merchandising perspective at the least. Like in the original, Lord Santeca gives Poe Dameron the data and the First Order forces attack. The only major difference is that Kylo Ren isn't there yet. Poe Dameron delivers the data to BB-8, but they are both captured by the First Order stormtroopers. But not before Poe was able to release a distress call, which summoned an entire small New Republic fleet. What follows is an intense firefight with the First Order stormtroopers being driven back, while Captain Phasma is mowing down the enemy soldiers left and right. For a brief moment, Poe Dameron is able to escape with BB-8, but is intercepted by a shaky FN-2187 who stuns him. With that, they can haul Poe back to the shuttle, and not a moment too soon, as Phasma sees a lightsaber ignite in the distance and instantly calls for an immediate retreat. With both Poe and BB-8 in First Order custody, word gets around that it was FN-2187 who was responsible for subduing the New Republic pilot and his droid. FN-2187 feigns happiness from the praise he is receiving, including the praise from Captain Phasma, who says that she might have misjudged him greatly this entire time. On the First Order's base, Supreme Leader Thrawn, flanked by his Praetorian Guard, congratulates Lord Santeca on coming so close to utterly destroying the First Order. He orders both him and Poe to be imprisoned while they extract BB-8's memory files, but Thrawn is kind enough to let Poe have one final goodbye to the droid. Hux is confused as to why Thrawn is showing both Poe and Lord Santeca so much respect. Thrawn tells him that maintaining even a small modicum of respect for your enemies will ensure that you will never underestimate them. Back at the hangar, FN-2187 and the surviving members of his squad were rewarded with medals for their acts of bravery, and when the ceremony ends, we transition to the prison at night. Poe is recovering from the injuries he sustained during his interrogation, and tries to escape through the vent on the ceiling with some help from Lord Santeca, but both are seemingly caught by FN-2187 standing outside their prison cell. Poe and Lord Santeca are taken aback when FN-2187 then releases. He tells them both that he will help them escape as long as they take him along with them as well. Without much of an option, the two of them follow the turncoat stormtrooper, pretending to be escorted for further interrogation. Everything seems to go well until they run into General Hux. At first, everything seems lost, but thinking quickly, FN-2187 tells Hux that he is taking them for some personal interrogation of his own. For the comrades they've both cost him. A venomous smile forms on Hux's lips, and he tells FN-2187 to move along. Afterwards, everything mostly plays out the same after they rescue BB-8, except for that Lord Santeca sacrifices himself so that Poe and FN-2187, who from then on is nicknamed Finn, can escape. While they're being shot at, they fiercely debate on which plan to go to, as Finn has no interest in ending up in New Republic custody. Poe realizes he has no choice but to play ball and suggests they immediately go to Jaku. They enter hyperspace, but upon their arrival, the damage that their hijacked TIE fighter sustained makes it crumble upon atmospheric re-entry, which then causes BB-8 to fall off while Finn and Poe are still trapped in the main cockpit. At first it seems that BB-8 is about to crash, but just in time he is able to catch himself on a tree branch with his grappling hook. He drops to the ground and looks up to where the TIE fighter had fallen, and with a determined beep, he rolls towards it. We finally return to Kira Ray as she goes about her daily routine of scrapping. She's about to hop back on her speeder when she sees BB-8 being wrangled by a rival scrapper. Like in the original, she rescues him and fixes his antennae and then offers him to join her. We transition to Finn crawling out of the TIE fighter wreckage. Once he's out, he spots Poe's body from behind. He is initially torn between helping him or just walking away into the distance. But his newfound consciousness gets the better of him and he pulls Poe out of the vehicle, instead of the fake-out death we got in the actual movie. The scene will then end with Finn dragging him across the misty wetlands on a makeshift sleigh made of shrapnel. We then transition back to the First Order base where General Hux is being court-martialed for his gross negligence in allowing Poe and BB-8 to escape, along with the stormtrooper FN-2187. Surprisingly, out of all the other senior officers for the hearing, Strawn is the calmest about the situation and just sentences Hux to be transferred to one of their other colonies in the unknown regions. Afterwards, Captain Phasma enters the room and reports that there's a transmission from an unknown vessel asking for Strawn's presence. Strawn walks out of the hangar with a First Order BB droid ready to receive the message. A hooded figure with a long breathing tube appears on the hologram to greet Supreme Leader Strawn. Strawn asks what the figure's name is, and for the time being, he simply gives him the name Snoke. Snoke offers Strawn an alliance, specifically against the new Jedi Order. Strawn asks how he intends to do it, to which another figure appears in the hologram. Snoke introduces this figure as his apprentice, Kylo Ren. Strawn notes that it would still take more than 2 to keep the new Jedi Order at bay, to which 5 more figures show up on the hologram, which Snoke refers to as the Knights of Red. Snoke tells Strawn that if he wishes to further their alliance, then all he has to do is call him, but Strawn tells him that he has already made up his mind, to which he asks if Snoke is aware of their current predicament. Snoke says that he was not aware of the data that the BB-1 droid was carrying, so Strawn also deduces that Snoke would have another bargaining chip up his sleeve. With a smirk beneath his mask, Snoke compliments Strawn's shrewdness, and the two of them arrange a transaction to be held on the moon, while Ren and his knights will track down FN-2187 and the BB-8 droid. And of course, the New Republic pilot as well. Back to Rey and BB-8 inside their hollowed out AT-AT, she asks BB-8 who he belongs to, and the droid says he can't remember. Kira Ray is sympathetic to him as she also does not know who she belonged to either, explaining that both her names were just 2 that people have called her over the years that she liked the best. Meanwhile, one of the Knights of Ren lands on Jaku, surveying the landscape and eventually traveling across the vast misty landscapes on a speeder bike. Back with Finn and the unconscious Poe as he's walking amongst piles and piles of hollowed out TIE fighters, he nervously tries to avoid making eye contact with the other scrappers who are giving him dirty looks. While that's going on, we get the same scene where Rey is handing over her day's salvage of scrap when Uncle Pludd notices BB-8 and offers to quadruple Kira Ray's usual payment. She is tempted, but decides against it. Finn hides Poe near some debris and goes around the village to ask for help, where he sees Rey fighting off a bunch of Uncle Pludd's Sugs as they are trying to steal BB-8. Finn helps Rey by aiming at the Sugs, but shoots at the ground in front of their feet instead. Kira thanks Finn for helping her out. Finn tells her that he and a friend were working for the New Republic, and are looking for a way off this planet. And since in this version BB-8's memories have been erased, he believes Finn without question, especially after he adds that he was in disguise, which is why he was wearing the stormtrooper arm and the TIE fighter that BB-8 was also on. Rey says that they can hide out in her hollowed out AT-AT walker. She is horrified at Poe's battered body, so both her and Finn do their best to patch him up once inside. Finn then asks Rey if there's a spaceport where they can borrow a ship to get off Jaku. Kira Ray says that ideally it would be Takodana, which in this version is the name of a floating city over one of the giant lakes on this version of Jaku, instead of being another planet. However, she has had to steal things from some of Maz Kanata's crew and is too afraid to go anywhere near the city, so she tells Finn that they will have to make their journey on their own. Finn says that they can try and pick her up later. Rey appreciates the gesture, but says that she has to stay here because her parents might come back. She points at the wall filled with hash marks. Finn asks Rey why she is so sure that they will come back, and Rey retorts that Finn would probably do the same for his own parents. Finn goes silent before admitting that he never knew his own parents, but leaves out the part where he was raised by the First Order his whole life. Rey instantly apologizes, but Finn says it's nothing. The next morning, Poe finally wakes up and asks where he is. Finn explains the situation to Poe, and Poe thanks him for keeping him alive thus far. He also tells Finn that he can keep his jacket. Finn is surprised by Poe's gesture, and he tells Poe about his plan to go to Takodana and see if he can board a ship there. Poe asks where he is going, and Finn says, anywhere that's far enough from the First Order. Poe in turn points out that it will be easier said than done, since he is just as wanted by the First Order as he is himself, and if he just surrendered himself to the New Republic, then he could be protected. Finn says that while he doesn't want anything to do with the First Order anymore, that doesn't mean he respects the Republic any more than he already did, and he tells Poe all the things he had been taught about them. Poe says that while some of the things he mentioned did happen, just as many of them are greatly exaggerated, distorted, or downright false. He tells Finn that as long as he can still help him return to the Order 2 station, then he won't turn him in. Admitting to Finn that he's sympathetic to him considering that he was likely kidnapped as a child like most of the First Order army. Finn denies what he says, yet still appreciates the gesture, but still refuses to let Poe take him there. The next morning, Finn is surprised to see that Kira has decided to join them. She admits that at this point she would probably have a better chance of finding her parents in the stars than staying on here. Finn then asks where else they're going to go if not Takodana. Rey says that there is an alternative. Right now it's breeding season for the Raftars, and they happen to be popular as dangerous exotic pets much like Rancors. The three of them board a vehicle similar to Jabba's sail barge, where a hooded figure watches them, especially Finn and Rey. The three of them banter with each other, with Finn asking Rey where they should go first, and Poe rattles off suggestions of plans and places he has been to. It is then that Rey notices the hooded figure that has been following them. Poe says he didn't even notice them. Rey says that it's probably just one of Uncle Plugg's thugs and warns them to keep an eye out. Rey turns around, having sensed something in the mist, and sees the Knight of Ren burst through it on their speeder bike. The Knight catches up with the sail barge and tries to kill Poe and Finn specifically. Rey tries to fend him off but is knocked to the ground. Finn tries to shoot him but his blaster gets pulled out of his hand, and Poe drops to the ground as he's being choked to death. Kira Rey on pure instinct throws her hands out and sends the Knight flying off his feet and only saves himself by plunging his blade into the barge floor. He gets back up as if nothing happened. It is then that the hooded figure jumps in front of the trio, revealing themselves to be a Jedi. He tells the three of them to escape as he fends off the attacker. Rey stares in awe for a bit, never having seen a Jedi in action. Finally, the Knight is pushed off the barge. The Jedi turns around the trio and introduces themselves. Poe asks if they've been sent for him. The Jedi says yes, but also that there has been an awakening in the Force, felt across the entire galaxy, with multiple people becoming Force sensitive in the same span of time. Before they can elaborate, the Knight crawls back onto the barge, and the Jedi tells them to head to their starfighter, which is roughly north of where they are, before they descend off the barge, locked in combat with the Knight. The three watch as the two combatants fade into the distance. They wait until a good distance before jumping off the barge and eventually locate the Jedi starship, but find two more problems. One, the starfighter was a one-seater only, and two, it's currently being stolen by bandits of the Kanji Club criminal syndicate. If you're wondering why the Guavian Death Gang aren't here, you'll have to wait until my Rise of Skywalker rewrite to find that out. Poe, Finn and Kira decide to sneak on board while they aren't looking, but are caught. Rey tries to use the Force again, but is not successful this time. They are brought on the ship, where after being questioned, Kanji Club decides to sell them off as slaves later on. Their ship takes off and docks into a large cruiser, where Poe, Kira and Finn are dragged into a shipping container. They can't see what's going outside. Rey, however, uses her knowledge as a scrapper to figure out a way to open the container from within. They break out to see none other than Han Solo himself, wearing a trench coat similar to the one depicted in this movie's concept art, and with a deep-cut Star Wars comic reference underneath. Han Solo insults the Kanji Club members by naming 5 better places that they could have hidden the slaves in. A massive shootout follows between Kanji Club, Han, Chewbacca, who are also being supported by a whole group of Maz Kanata's crew. Finn covers both Poe and Rey as they get away from the blaster fire. During the fight, Rey gets up and asks both Poe and Finn to cover her further. They nod, and Rey rushes to a far corner in the room. One Kanji Club member notices what she is trying to do, but is shot by Finn before he can try to stop her. Rey smashes a few buttons on the control panel, and almost instantly all the Raftars are released at once. Havoc ensues as the Kanji Club are massacred by the rampaging creatures. The trio barely escape themselves, with Finn almost getting eaten by one of them, only being saved by Han shutting the door, cutting off the creature's tentacles. Rey rushes over to Finn, apologizing for almost getting him killed, and thanks Han for saving him. Han says it's no problem, and to Kira's surprise, he actually congratulates her for releasing the Raftars, admitting that he probably would have done the same, which Chewie does confirm. After they transport the Raftars back to Jaku, Han Solo noses the Millennium Falcon in the hangar, and we get the iconic
Chewie. We're home.
After it's revealed that Kanji Club had stolen it. We transition to the Knight of Ren, who had been sent to track down and kill Poe and Finn, carrying the head of the Jedi in one hand. He transmits a message to Kylo Ren, who is on the bridge with Thrawn wearing an Isalamari around his neck. The Knight confirms that the New Republic pilot and the traitor Evan 2187 are indeed on Jaku. Kylo Ren suggests to Thrawn that they should launch an attack immediately. Thrawn points out that it's an unwise move since Maz Kanata is not an enemy that they can afford to have right now, and it might hurt potential relations that they could have with the other pirate organizations that dwell within wild space. Kylo Ren says that he and his master might have something that some of her enemies could use. He summons two of his knights who are carrying a crate that they drop off both in front of Ren and Thrawn. It is opened, revealing a small mountain of red crystals within. Ren explains that they are synthetic kyber crystals. Thrawn is impressed but asks Kylo how this is possible, since their own scientists, both during and after the reign of the Old Empire, have been unable to crack the code. Kylo Ren says that his master will share the secret in due time, but that for the time being, they can guarantee their functionality. He demonstrates this after one of the knights hands over an empty lightsaber hilt and slots in the crystal. He throws it to Phasma, who catches it and ignites it. She is impressed, but asks Ren why he or his master would be willing to sell them to a bunch of pirates. Thrawn is the one to answer this question. He surmises that the greater reason is that for many across the galaxy, the lightsaber is a defining symbol of power of the Jedi, even though in reality, it's only half true. That, regardless of the reality, once the lightsaber becomes as common as a blaster, then most people who only have that superficial understanding of what makes a Jedi will feel like they will no longer need them. Ren nods and says that the only limitation compared to a real kyber crystal is that, so far, synthetic ones can only sustain a continuous charge equivalent to 24 hours, while a real one can theoretically sustain a charge indefinitely unless turned off. Phasma derides this as a stupid design flaw, yet Thrawn points out that, thanks to said design flaw, the people who purchase them will have no choice but to come back to them to replenish their synthetic kyber crystal supply. That way, they will have an additional source of funds they can rely on if the worst is to come. Assuming that Snoke still has no qualms about cooperating, of course. Kylo Ren says that he will inform his master of his decision, while Thrawn will negotiate a joint attack on Jaku with the other pirate lords. Back on Jaku, Kira Ray, Poe Dameron, and Finn are being led through Takodana City and are about to enter Maz Kanata's palace. Now, if there is one thing that I have to praise this movie and the other sequel trilogy movies for, it is that I really like some of their new alien designs. While not all of them work for me, obviously, I have to name at least a few of my favorites from this movie, which are the Abdenado, the Husk, the Fragosians, the Dolphidians, the Dowutans, the Kulisedo, the Tarzans, the Mleto, and Professor Allium's species, which doesn't even have a name. Like, seriously, how dare you not give my favorite Force Awakens original Club Shido besides Sidon Sano's species a name? So, that is what I'm going to do. Somebody might have already thought of a name, but I'm taking credit for this one. Professor Allium's species shall be called the Venzal. Take it or leave it, but this is what I will be speaking to the galaxy until it becomes canon. Rey is nervous, but when they enter, it takes her several seconds to recognize Maz Kanata. The one she had heard about was a ruthless pirate queen who would have dropped you into a lake full of rastards if you forgot to greet her respectfully. Instead, like in the official version of the movie, she comes across more like a compassionate old grandma. But Maz does admit that the rumors Rey did hear, while partially exaggerated, would have still been more or less accurate a few centuries ago. Now, one big deviation from the original is the part where Rey is summoned by Anakin's lightsaber, because instead of Rey this time, it's Finn who senses the lightsaber. Now, another minor change I would personally add is that there would be no flashbacks during the sequence, but instead we would still hear various sounds of blaster fire, then followed up by people screaming as they are cut down by a lightsaber. Admittedly, this change is purely a me thing, more so than most of the other changes in this rewrite. One thing I always liked about the Star Wars movies is that they don't use flashbacks, which in turn leaves a lot of things for the imagination, but I don't want to get sidetracked too much. As Rey did in the original version, Maz and Finn have an exchange where she recognizes that Finn is running away from something, and Finn says that he doesn't care and begs Maz for a way to escape from this planet, regardless if the lightsaber called to him or not. Maz tells him to ask Sidon Isano for a lift, and she hands Finn the lightsaber. This is where we get the same scene where Finn confesses to Rey of having been at first with a stormtrooper. The only real difference is that he's still in denial about having been kidnapped as a child. He also admits that even though he's leaving, he will always be grateful for meeting Rey. Kira Ray watches him leave with Sidon and his crew, where we cut to the scene where Han is sitting in the Millennium Falcon watching a holographic recording of him playing with two boys while Chewbacca is fixing up the interior. He looks up when Rey enters and she asks who those two boys in the recording are. Han says that those two were his sons, Ben and Sam Solo, who was also lifted from the earlier concept art for The Force Awakens. He says that 7 years ago they went missing. Ben was once trained to be a Jedi under Luke, while Sam, unlike Ben, wasn't Force sensitive, and together they fled to the unknown regions and haven't been found since. Han says that Luke blamed himself for it to such a point that he willingly left the new Jedi Order to go and look for them both for a while, especially after several of his students disappeared trying to help him. Rey tells Han about her encounter with the Dark Warrior, and about how she was able to push him with her mind alone. Han confirms to Rey that everything she had heard about the Jedi and the Force is real. Han tells her that he can get her to a Jedi temple once all this is over, and Rey bonds a bit with Chewie by helping out with some of the repairs. Poe Dameron enters the interior of the Millennium Falcon, honored to be inside such a well-known and important ship. He asks Kira Ray where Finn is, and Rey tells him that Finn left with one of the other pirates. It is then that Han learns that Finn was a stormtrooper, and he initially chastises Poe and Rey for letting him escape, but Poe vouches that, despite his past, Finn is trustworthy. Meanwhile, Finn is aboard Sidon's ship, still holding on to Anakin's lightsaber in one hand, and a blaster in the other. He only looks up when he overhears one of the crew members mention how fortunate they were to have left the city before it was destroyed. Finn asks what they are talking about, and the crew members tell him that the First Order plans to attack Takodana City any moment now, along with a bunch of Maz Kanata's enemies. Without hesitation, Finn orders them to drop him back off so he can warn Poe and Rey. The other crew members are confused until Sidon pieces together that Finn was the traitorous stormtrooper that the First Order had been searching for. Before the crew can kidnap Finn, he pulls out the lightsaber and takes one of Sidon's pirates hostage, threatening to kill them unless they go back to Takodana City. Sidon admires Finn's boldness and his loyalty to his friends. Back on the Falcon, Poe asks Han what he's doing out here. Han admits that he came here to do a few favors for Maz Kanata in case she might be able to track down some leads to where Sam and Ben might have gone to. It is then that they hear an explosion coming from outside. They rush out to see the First Order TIE fighters attacking the city while stormtroopers assail the city walls. While that's going on, Finn is dropped into the port and rushes through the blaster fire. This is where we get the famous duel with him and the stormtrooper who yells, "Raider!" called FN2199. Now, as other people have pointed out, it does feel a bit weird that Finn is this kill happy with the other First Order stormtroopers, since, for all he knows, several of them could be his friends. So in this version, he is constantly begging FN2199 to stop every time he blocks an attack with Anakin's lightsaber, and is only saved after being knocked down when FN2199 is shot by Han borrowing Chewbacca's bowcaster like in the movie. Han asks Finn if he knew this was going to happen, and Finn tells him that he just found out about it, which is why he came back to save Kira Ray and Poe. As he says that, they both see the Millennium Falcon take off into the sky with Poe piloting it while Rey is manning the upper cannons. Han calls them and asks what they are thinking. Poe admits that the idea might have sounded better in his head, but it's too late to turn back now. Han sighs and just tells him to keep the Falcon as much intact as possible until the New Republic forces arrive. Poe has a bit of a harder time piloting the Falcon initially, but he does get used to it pretty quickly. Poe asks Rey for any suggestions, and she suggests that they could try to lose them in a field full of ruined Star Destroyers, thus leading to a similar sequence in the movie where the Millennium Falcon is diving in and out of several of them. Whereafter Rey and Poe congratulate each other on a job well done, but she does remind him that they should return to Takodana City at once. Back during the battle within said city, Finn senses an all too familiar presence. He sees the same Knight of Ren who attacked them on the sail barge, flanking the actual Kylo Ren, who is also flanked by Phasma, who turns on her own lightsaber and engages Finn in combat. Han and Chewie try to help Finn, but Kylo Ren holds their blaster bolts with the Force and pushes them back. Han asks why he doesn't just kill them. Kylo remains silent until he looks up at the sky to see the Millennium Falcon fly over them as Rey shoots on the ground in front of their feet. Kylo holds back as many of the shots as he can, but this leaves a big enough opening for Finn to destroy Phasma's lightsaber, but she swiftly kicks him unconscious to the ground. Kylo Ren picks up Anakin's lightsaber just in time for the New Republic forces to arrive. Phasma orders her own forces to retreat. She initially tries to shoot Finn, but Kylo tells her to bring him back to their ship. Phasma says fine, but tells Kylo that he will answer to Thrawn himself for this. Han tries to shoot Kylo again, but once more he just pushes Han and Chewbacca back to a building with the Force and warns them to stop pursuing him if they want to keep living. The New Republic forces successfully drive off the First Order and the remaining pirates. Poe lands the Millennium Falcon and apologizes to Han, admitting that he's always wanted to fly it since he was a child. It is afterwards where Han tells both him and Kira Ray that the First Order have taken Finn back. Ray is surprised and touched that Finn came back despite everything he told her. Han assures her that they will find a way to rescue him somehow. He tells Ray that if she wants to, they can take her to be trained in the Force by none other than Luke Skywalker himself. Kira is shocked but also ecstatic at the idea. Han says that they will leave as soon as possible for the Alderaan 2 station. We cut to Finn slowly waking up, strapped to an interrogation chair. He sees Kylo Ren standing right next to him. At first he is silent until he raises his hand with Anakin's lightsaber and asks Finn how did he get it. Finn says he doesn't know, except that he could sense it during his brief stay in Takodana City. This answer infuriates Kylo Ren and he forcibly extracts the memories from Finn's head, which infuriates him even more, since he now knows that Finn isn't even aware of who the lightsaber belongs to. Finn then asks who it belonged to, and Kylo practically yells that it belonged to Darth Vader before he turned to the dark side. Finn doesn't know how to respond to that other than by asking Kylo why he hasn't killed him yet. The answer is that Kylo Ren can sense how strong he is in the Force and that he has decided to train Finn to become one of his knights. For as he says, it's the least Finn can do after Kylo ensured that he would be spared. Before leaving the room, Kylo Ren gives Finn one last warning that he doesn't have much time to make up his mind, and if he won't kill him, then the First Order certainly will. I should also note that unlike in the official version of the interrogation scene with Kylo and Rey, in this version, he does not take his helmet off. Back with Rey on board the Millennium Falcon, they dock out of hyperspace where Rey stares in awe at the Alderaan 2 station, a giant metallic ring-like structure like the Ringo Vinda station from the Clone Wars, which now acts as the center of the New Republic Senate instead of the one on Coruscant. While the actual Alderaan 2 planet is a barren wasteland that's gradually being terraformed with several systems contributing both flora and fauna from their respective homeworlds as a symbol of unity. This is also where Han and Chewie reunite with Leia, and while the relationship is a bit strained, it's not to the point where they have split like in the official version. Rey introduces herself, still in disbelief that she is standing next to Leia Organa and Han Solo of all people. Poe comes forth and gives a salute, apologizing for failing to extract the data. Leia says that while it isn't ideal, since Poe has escaped, they might be able to backtrack his course from Jaku back to the First Order base. Back on the First Order base, Finn wakes up again and sees the same stormtrooper who kept guard over Rey in the official version, FN-1824. He walks over to Finn and aims his blaster at him, telling Finn that Phasma ordered him to kill him, but that he felt he should at least be conscious while he does it out of respect. But before he kills him, FN-1824 asks why Finn would disrespect his comrades by leaving, especially after the battle that led to the capture of Lord Santekka and the New Republic pilot, of which he was a part of as well. Finn admits that he left because at first he was a coward, but then he later realized that it was because that if he had stayed there, he would have died just like FN-2003 on their last battle together. While out there, he would have had a choice of when to. FN-2184 aims his blaster at Finn's head. At first, Finn closes his eyes, but he decides to keep them open until FN-2184 pulls the trigger, but it never happens. Instead, FN-2184 releases his restraints and warns Finn that if they do meet again, he will not hesitate to shoot him this time. Finn thanks him and crawls through one of the vents and steals a set of human stormtrooper armor in the dressing room. He walks casually through the halls and thanks to his armor, none of the other First Order officers recognize him. Even Phasma doesn't notice him. We then cut to the Millennium Falcon as it arrives on Ahch-To, with Leia, Chewie, Han, and Rey. The reason for this change is that, while I do think many criticisms that have been lobbied against the sequel trilogy are way overblown, a bit like the prequels back in the day, and while I do think a lot of them do hold up, like Jar Jar Binks being annoying, the acting being generally too stiff and flat for the characters where it doesn't fit, some of the retcons and other narrative choices are really stupid, and some of the dialogue is genuinely painful to listen to. I don't include the bad CGI because that's more of a result of technological limitations than any lack of professionalism, though one thing particularly distracted me upon rewatching those movies, which I did not notice back then, which is that the clones are CGI, like, why could they just not have been guys in suits like the stormtroopers? But going back to the sequel trilogy, I wholeheartedly agree with the one criticism that the biggest missed opportunity in this entire thing was that the original trio never shared a single scene together. Now look, nobody could have predicted that Carrie Fisher was going to pass away in 2016. But they did know that Han Solo was going to die in this movie, so this reunion aims to rectify that, while also keeping his character depth. As it turns out, it was Han's idea of bringing Rey to Luke's island as an attempt to bring Luke out of his funk, so to speak. Although Leia and Chewie both point out that it's probably not going to work, but in the end, they really just want an excuse to see Luke again. Kira Rey is surprised and then disappointed due to how different Luke is in person versus the Luke Skywalker she had envisioned in her head based on the stories she had heard. But despite that, the atmosphere is pleasant overall, with Han recounting some of their past adventures. It is during this time that Rey tells Luke about the masked warrior who tried to kill Poe and Finn. Han confirms the story, saying that there was also another one with a lightsaber. And while they don't know who they are, the only thing they are sure of is that they are working for the First Order. Rey then asks Luke about the awakening that the Jedi on Jaku told her about. Luke confirms that he did indeed sense it and guesses that Rey is one of those who had been affected by it. However, Luke says that he will not train Rey, but says that there are several Jedi who would be happy to train her from the various temples across the galaxy. It is after this exchange that we cut back to Finn on the First Order base. He walks around the same hangar where he and Poe initially escaped from, where he sees a whole group of children being escorted from a transport vessel. He exchanges a look with one of them as they are led out of the hangar. His gaze lingers on where they were. With Poe's words circling in his head, he walks to one of the communication towers. He tells them that FN-2187 has escaped. None of the higher-ups recognize him for the same reasons that even Phasma didn't, and most of the guards rush out, leaving just enough of them left to where Finn can feasibly stun all of them while leaving one still unconscious to send a broadcast to the Alderaan 2 station. The transmission is sent, and Finn stuns the communications officer just in time for the alarm to be set off and for him to crawl back into the vents. Back on the Alderaan 2 station, Poe is in a briefing and is called upon to take a look at the transmission's location, confirming that it's probably the same place that he was held. They immediately inform Leia about this development, but she does point out that it is suspicious that they would be sending a transmission that could be traced back to their source, but tells them to proceed, albeit with caution. Back on the Millennium Falcon, Han and Leia are watching the same recording of Ben and Sam playing with them. After they wish each other luck, Leia joins Chewie in the cockpit, but not before they say one more goodbye to Luke. Han keeps looking at the recording as something falls into place within his head. Meanwhile, Kylo Ren is in the conference room as Phasma lays the blame, and rightfully so to an extent, on Kylo's shoulders for FN-2187 escaping and then sending the distress signal. She suggests that all the First Order forces be called here to fend off any New Republic ships that are probably inbound to the location as they speak, but Thrawn points out that would be a wasteful strategy and suggests something else. He points out that the only reason the New Republic hasn't tried to venture this far into the unknown regions is that, as far as the rest of the galaxy is concerned, the First Order is really not that big of a threat as the Empire was back in its heyday. And while they are not weak, their numbers are still too small for an all-out assault. Yet, as he also points out, they might still have some time to mask their proper power, for a little while longer at the least. And while the new Jedi Order might still be a thorn in their side, thanks to their neutral status from the New Republic, they are unlikely to be heated as much as they might have been during the Clone Wars. And to their credit, Kylo and his knights have done a more than adequate job at keeping them at bay, and now thanks to the synthetic Kyber crystals, they can now also resurrect Project Supremacy. As Finn runs down the halls, the alarms blare while the other stormtroopers search in vain for the traitor. But like in Maz Kanata's castle, he pauses and walks into the room where he sees Anakin's lightsaber in a glass case. He feels the same draw to it and quickly removes the lid and gets out of there as fast as possible just before Kylo Ren comes in. Similar to the original version, we get the similar scene where he talks to Darth Vader's burnt helmet. It is then afterwards where he notices that Anakin's lightsaber is gone and he flies into a blind rage and slashes the wall with his lightsaber. It is right afterwards that he receives a private message from Snoke himself. He warns Kylo that he is lucky that Thrawn saved his skin, but he should not count on dumb luck in the future. He orders Kylo to lead the few forces that will stay behind, with none of his knights to back him up against the New Republic forces once they arrive. This battle will serve as his final proof of his worthiness, and if he succeeds, then he will complete his training. And only then, when that is finished, will he be granted the title of Darth. The New Republic ships enter the atmosphere, where a battle kind of similar to the one we got, except it's not about destroying a planet-sized, planet-destroying superweapon, but rather more outmaneuvering the smaller forces both in the air and on the land. Poe leads the aerial forces while Han and Chewie lead the forces on the ground from the forest, while Rey is armed and fighting alongside the other New Republic soldiers. Likewise, a few Jedi lead the charge at the front of the base, while most of the remaining First Order soldiers are distracted by Han and his own forces. Rey sees one stormtrooper hiding in the forest and shoots at him. The stormtrooper yells and takes his helmet off, revealing himself as Finn. Rey feels terrible for almost getting Finn killed, but he says she doesn't need to apologize, and the two of them hug. Their reunion is short-lived as they both sense a very strong presence as heading right towards them. Without needing to say anything to the other, they both run through the forest. But Kylo Ren catches up with them quickly, and like in the original we get a fight scene between him and Finn where he tries to fight him to his best but is knocked to the ground and tortured by one of the crossguard vents on his lightsaber, and is eventually force pushed to the edge of the cliff behind several trees. Rey picks up the lightsaber but does pretty much as well as Finn did, Kylo picking up the lightsaber back and tells Rey that, like with Finn, he can sense how strong she is in the Force and offers to show her its ways if she just lets him kill Finn. Rey, in spite of her injuries, refuses, and Kylo is about to kill both of them when Han comes in and shouts, "Ben!" Other than the slightly different location, everything plays out pretty much the same onward. Except, of course, this will be the first time that Kylo Ren takes his helmet off, revealing Ben. Han asks Ben where Sam is, and all Kylo says is that he is sorry, that he could not save him in time. Han, while surprised, is not as mad as expected. He tells Ben to come back home, and like in the movie, Ben says he knows what he has to do, but he doesn't know if he has the strength to do it. Han puts a hand on his lightsaber, and when the sun goes down, Kylo ignites it and kills his father instantly. At the moment, we cut to Leia putting her hand over her chest, and Luke stumbling down on the ground on Ahch-To. Han Solo's body falls over the cliff while Chewie roars in anguish and tries to shoot him, but his bowcaster is pulled from his arms and sliced over by Ren. As his final word, he warns Chewie that he will not hesitate to kill him the next time they meet, before jumping off the cliff himself and escaping into the distance. The moment he does that, the First Order base explodes, killing all the New Republic soldiers inside it. We transition to Finn, unconscious in a hospital bed on the Alderaan 2 station while Rey sits beside him. Finn finally wakes up, and it is then that they both hear a voice. One Finn doesn't know, but Kira does. Luke, all the way across from the Alderaan 2 station all the way to Ahch-To, says that when they are ready, he will share them his knowledge of the Force. Finn asks Rey who that voice they heard belonged to, and she says it's Luke Skywalker. Finn is surprised but frowns slightly. Rey asks what's wrong, and for the time being, he insists that it's nothing. Before they head off, Poe, Leia, and Chewbacca see them off. Leia thanking Finn for what little intel he was able or willing to provide on some of the First Order colonies and some of the sympathizers in and out of the New Republic. Leia then has one final exchange with Kira Rey, kind of like the one she had in the Age of Resistance tie-in comic. With that, Finn and Kira Rey are led to the Millennium Falcon with Chewbacca, and they head off back to Ahch-To.